welcome everybody to a special Nosher cooking class. We had to get rescheduled. We were supposed to do this one right before Yom Kippur, and Susan was under the weather. So we were like, we can't give up the chance to learn and cook with Susan. So here we are, just a month later, to learn from one of our wonderful contributors, Susan Barocas, who's based in Washington, D.C. She has a very impressive bio, but I would just like to say I count her among many friends and dear, dear person to me. My favorite fact about Susan is that she has cooked at the White House several times over, which is a story I never tire of hearing. Susan's going to be sharing two recipes tonight with us: pumpkin borrecas and a vegetarian tagine. Right? We're making a veg, or is it
Vegetarian. Mm-hmm.
vegetarian tagine? Amazing, perfect for weeknight. Again, I just want to reiterate: chat is open for questions. Please, my rule is, we're here to learn the recipes that Susan's teaching. So, like, maybe don't ask me a million questions about replacements for the recipes that Susan's teaching. I know you're going to anyway, but I'll just say that. So I will shut up and hand it over to Susan. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And Susan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us as usual.
Thank you, Shannon. And it was great to see you here in DC over the weekend. That was really lovely. And thank you all for joining us. We all need some cozy food about now, right? It's just like Shannon's book, comfort food. We need that. So these are a couple comfort food dishes for me. And we're going to make the vegetable tagine first. And I know that most of you, like me, do not have a tagine. So you may not be cooking some of these kinds of dishes, which are, really part of North African cuisine. So the tagine is the conical shaped top that goes like that. And the whole point behind that is you use very little liquid, you mound the food inside, and it's got a really nice seal, a tight seal. And what happens is the steam goes up from the food and the spices, and it condenses on the lid and drops back down to re-moisturize and keep constantly seasoning the food. But what I discovered, because I came back from a trip to Morocco, where I had learned to make a tagine, a vegetable tagine, from my friends I was visiting, from their housekeeper. And she was a great cook. She spoke Arabic and French, and I speak Spanish and English. But we both spoke expressive hands and facial expressions and, that kind of thing. So I managed to get several recipes from her, including kind of a tagine, but she was doing it in the tagine pot. And so I came home and started experimenting with just either a Dutch oven or a heavy bottomed pot with a good lid. One of the most important things is that the lid is tight, and so it can have that condensation process. So don't worry if you don't have a tagine, you can still make this. And this is a great dish to make for holidays and Shabbat. People are so impressed because it's like, wow, this is hard. You will see tonight that it's really not. The hardest part about this dish is cutting everything up, which I did in advance because you all don't need to see me cut vegetables. That's not what we're here for. So the first thing we're going to do to start, though, is to make a spice mixture. Now, the spice mixture that's used in most tagines, like in Morocco and Tangier, or Algeria rather, Libya, they use Ras el Hanout, which means head of the market. This is like one of the most important spice mixtures in most cuisines. This is the real Ras el Hanout has 27 different spices mixed. And one of the things is like everybody has their own mix, kind of like with za'atar. When you go to Israel, you could buy a whole bunch of different za'atars. same idea. Any spice mix is going to be influenced by the person making it. So when you start to make your own spice mixes, you do the same thing. You really don't like cumin, leave it out, whatever. Now, the recipe for this is going to be posted this week on the Nosher, of course, the website. And what you'll see is a story about, I'm stirring the onions, by the way. You also didn't need to see the onions cook for 10 minutes. So I've already started them so we can move ahead. But you'll see is that there's a spice mixture recipe as well. It's not 27 spices. What I've done is I've condensed it down to 3, 6, 7, 8 with some, and I give you some options of things you can add also, but the basic mixture is 8. So we're just gonna mix it up. Paprika.
Susan, can I ask you a question about the spice mix?
Yes.
I know that there are a couple of companies in the US that sell Ras Al Hanout. Would that be an okay substitute if you didn't want to mix your own spices?
Absolutely. And I actually have somebody's, I don't know who's, in my cupboard for when I need it in a rush or I just don't feel like doing it myself. Yes, absolutely. You can get it online. You can get it from several different companies. You can go to local markets if you have a Persian market. Sometimes we'll even have it, but definitely if you go to some Middle Eastern markets or African markets, you'll find Ras El Hanout. Yes, it is. The thing you have to do is be aware that they will taste slightly different from different people mixing them or different companies. They might even have a little different color depending on the amount of spices in them, of each spice. So yes, that's a really good question. I'm always like, if it's going to help you make a recipe or help you cook, absolutely. I'm always for whatever helps get you cooking your own food. And this is a tablespoon of cumin, a couple teaspoons of ginger, some turmeric, of course. This, probably many of you, these are just so healthy, these spices. There's so many benefits, like the anti-inflammatory properties in turmeric, ginger for your stomach. This is good stuff. All right. What else do we have here? A teaspoon of cinnamon, a teaspoon of coriander, and what we're using is a half a teaspoon of allspice. I love the way allspice smells, and if you don't cook with it, try to start experimenting a little bit with it. It's the #1 spice in Syrian food, and if you've ever had Syrian Jewish food, you've had allspice. And then we're supposed to do a 1/4 teaspoon of my ginger is a little lumpy. Gonna have to whip that out. So we're supposed to do a 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. I adore cloves. We don't use cloves in this country that much in our cooking. I like adding it, but you got to be a little careful. Okay, that's about a 1/4 teaspoon because it can become overwhelming. It's another one that's really good for your digestion and used to be used much more. All right, so we're just going to mix that up. Now, what I normally do is I double this at least and keep it in a jar in my cupboard, so I always have it. But today, I am doing just this recipe, which will still give me a little extra. All right. When all else fails, you got to use your hands, right? Now it's breaking up all the lumps. Plus, oh, my hands smell good. So you should try that. Oh, wow. This is a great mixture. Okay, so what we're going to do is add these onions. So they're cut in a dice, not, some people chop their onions for a tagine. I like them a little smaller. I like the onions to not be quite so obvious. So they need just a moment more. You want them soft, but no browning. Do not let them brown. The whole thing about a tagine is the layering of the vegetables. All right. And this pot, by the way, it's the recipe that you'll see will say a 6 to 7 quart. This is a 5.5 because that's what I have. It's going to be tight, but I have larger pots, which I often cook in, but I wanted you all to see this is the best pot for you to see into. So we're gonna make it work, hopefully. Okay, so I have my onions that have cooked for a little bit. Now I'm adding 3 minced cloves of garlic. You can add less, you can add more. These are 3 large cloves, and so I feel pretty comfortable because they are large and I love garlic. So I'm just gonna let that cook for a minute with 1 tablespoon of the spice mixture. Okay, why am I cooking the spices? When you cook spices, just slightly, the heat starts to release not just the aroma, but it deepens the spice itself. So, oh my God, my kitchen's starting to smell so good. This is so exciting because I will have vegetable tagine to eat. By the way, I didn't use a lot of oil. You can use more oil if you want. I just had a tablespoon in the pan, and the recipe says 2 tablespoons total. 1 is in the pan and 1 you'll see we're going to use later. You can add a little more if you like, but it really does work okay like this with the 1. Depends on your pot too, but most of the pots you would be cooking this in are going to be pots that don't stick. Otherwise, you're not using the right pot. All right, so it's starting to smell really good. You just want to stir it a little, give it a minute or 2, and then we're going to start our
Susan,
layer.
can I throw one question out at you?
Absolutely.
Actually, first I just want to say, to reiterate, that the recipe will get sent out. I also shared all of the ingredients in the chat, but we will definitely send the recipe out. Very, very sorry. I know you're still going to ask 5 more times, but just to reiterate, we will send the recipe out. Then the question that we had was, if you are going to use a tagine, what diameter size do you need or would you recommend?
Probably one. Let me see. I forget what the diameter of this one is, but I would say, yeah, probably one that's got a base that's at least 10.5 or 11 inches. That would be perfect. This is almost 11 inches wide, so you can picture all the food being mounded up into the kind of conical lid a little bit. You don't want any of the food in either the tagine or your pot to touch the lid. You want some space, a couple inches at least. But yeah, I'd say like 10.5, 11 inch would be ideal. If you use a small one, you're not going to, or else cut the recipe in half. And if you have a smaller one and you want to make it in that, just cut the recipe in half is the other option. All right. So what we're going to do is, I have a can of chickpeas I had opened earlier, and I have the aquafaba, which is the liquid from the chickpeas. 2 things I want to tell you. One is, I have only used a pinch of salt with my onions because it helps release the moisture from the onions. So I always saute my onions with a little salt. I did not rinse the chickpeas because the salt on the chickpeas is going to contribute to the dish. And I don't have a lot of extra salt that I'm going to add to this dish. Because the aquafaba also has salt in it. This aquafaba, this is gold. The liquid from your chickpeas is gold. If you're vegan, especially, you already know you can whip it up literally so that it looks like whipped cream. But you can, in soups and stews and everything, it has a viscosity kind of, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful ingredient. And it's really a waste to throw it out. So I mix it right in. And now I'm going to add, by the way, I have to read the recipe because I just recently wrote it, because I make this usually just by going, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You know, it's one of those recipes I've been making for so long. I had to stop and think about how I was going to tell you all to make it. Because
That's how you know it's a good recipe, Susan.
And by the way, it's a recipe that's very flexible. You'll see as I add vegetables, there's other things you can do, you know, or if you don't have one of the things I add, don't worry, use something else. You have turnips you want to use up, cut them up. The big thing is to have things similar. So like, for instance, these are close this is butternut squash. It's about 4 cups. You could use a little less if you want, but the idea is to have things that are kind of close in size. So it's 1 inch about. All right, and I'm just stirring this. This is the bottom. This is the base of our tagine. Okay.
Someone also had a question about using fresh chickpeas, and if you were going to do that and you soaked them already, how many chickpeas and how much of the water would you add?
Well, I would probably do about a cup of dried chickpeas. And that's the only thing is that the water, when you soak them, you still have to cook them because they won't cook enough in the tagine if they're not cooked at all. And so now what I'm doing, by the way, is I'm starting to kind of mound things a little bit towards the middle. All right, so now on top of this, what I'm going to do is sprinkle, this is the rind of preserved lemon. You can either dice it or cut it in strips. I love skinny strips, and that's what I tend to use. I also love preserved lemon. So I'm going to throw about a third of, this is a whole one. I'm going to throw, just toss it in to season this. If you don't have preserved lemon, still make this recipe. Use a couple of teaspoons of the lemon zest instead, and add that about a third at a time. Okay, now on top of this, okay, we are going to add, oh, by the way, I have to tell you, I forgot. While I'm adding and layering the vegetables, I like to turn the light from medium to the lowest flame. Okay, so it's heating, but it's not doing so much because I'm adding everything as we go, and there'll be more liquid. I don't want to cook out the liquid too soon. Okay, now, okay. We did that. Ah, right. So here's my sweet potato. The recipe says unpeeled. If you really like to peel them, you can. I scrub mine and I love having the skin. And one of the things about having the skin that I like is they kind of help keep the sweet potato together that as it has cooked. Okay, so these are you can see I'm building a dome and just fitting all this in, hopefully, each layer. And that's our, you can use white potatoes, but if you do, I would really suggest that they be Yukon Gold because they will not fall apart the way that an Idaho potato will from all the starchiness. They're slightly less starchy. Okay, now we have the sweet potatoes, and now we're going to add some carrots. You can use more carrots. This is 2 carrots. I'm not a huge carrot lover in this, so of course I just put 2, but if you want a bunch of carrots, you can do a bunch of carrots. Or, you know, you don't have butternut squash or any kind of squash, and by the way, you can use different kinds of squash. You could slice up delicata, like in half moons or in quarter moons, slices and then quarter them, and use them in one of the layers. That would be terrific too. I have done that. Okay, so now we have the carrots. This is, and now I'm going to add a little more lemon. We're going to save a third for the end, but here we go. Okay. The preserved lemon is so easy to make, but you can also buy it. I strongly suggest you cook with it if you don't yet. And one of the things is that a lot of recipes like this call for using the rind. So a lot, you used to throw out the insides on, no, you don't throw out the insides. They're great zhuzhed up into a salad dressing with some just olive oil, maybe a little extra squeeze of fresh lemon and garlic, salt and pepper. You have a beautiful salad dressing or marinade for chicken or fish. Drizzle over veggies. It's really good. All right. So don't throw away the insides. I have a jar of insides in my refrigerator, the inside of the lemons. And I am making some salad dressing with them tomorrow. Some people also make drinks. They're really good in alcohol. People make like preserved lemon martinis, that kind of thing.
How
All
about
right.
the next time I visit you, Susan, you make that for me?
Which, the salad dressing? No.
I mean, sure, to go along with the vodka.
Right. All right, that's a deal. Okay, so you can see that I'm really working on making sure that this has kind of got a little mound to it. And as you can mound or not as much as you want. I know what this pot can hold, so I'm being a little careful not to be extreme in my mounding. And so now we have cabbage. You don't have to use it, but I did put it in the recipe because my Fatima, who taught me to make a tagine, always would lean cabbage, and these are wedges, kind of skinny, from just a small half a cabbage, or half a small cabbage rather. But I'm gonna have to sideways them a little. In hers, because she was using a tagine, they'd be standing up all around the side. But that's not as easy with this, so we're gonna lay them in. Okay, there we go. Oh, and we have extra, so just pour it in. Okay, now comes a fun, I'm gonna make like a sauce almost. The chickpeas themselves and olives will go in later. So I have been warming 2 cups of vegetable stock. You can use water or you can use vegetable stock. You can even use chicken stock if you prefer. It will change the taste though. Now, this is vegetable stock. Those of you who know me or who've taken classes with me, you know that I make my own vegetable stock. It's easy peasy. I just I'll show you. So scraps like these will be going into my freezer. And when I get a full bag, I just throw them in a pot, a great big soup pot, cover them with water. I usually put several cloves of garlic and a couple bay leaves, let that cook for a couple hours. And then if you want to compost, which is a great thing, compost after that, but you've gotten a whole other life out of these veggies. You strain it, you have this beautiful, this is, so you can see, and it's different colors depending on what you put in it. If you have a lot of onion skins, it'll be more orangey. And actually it makes for a very nice look when you're doing a vegetable chicken soup. You know, if you use some onion skins in it, it'll give you that kind of golden look, along with a little bit of turmeric. Anyway, all right. So what
That's
I've
just
done,
how I make my soup also, Susan. That makes me so happy.
that makes me happy.
Great minds. We must know something, right?
We do. We know the tricks. So I put the 2nd tablespoon of oil was already in this, and I'm whisking this. And the other thing I'm going to put in is the 2nd tablespoon of the spice mix. Okay, and I'm going to whisk it. So there is some left. This would be delicious if you want to put it on some chicken, some fish. You can make a rub, add a little olive oil to this, and smear it all over a whole head of broccoli that you core but leave whole. Roast that thing with this and some olive oil. So good. Okay, so this is well mixed. All right. All I'm gonna do now, in a tagine, you would usually use 1 cup of liquid. I have 2 because I always like to hedge my bet because it's not as efficient, this kind of a pot, even when they're good, they just aren't as efficient as a tagine in conserving the liquid. But this is pretty good. Okay. So I've done that all over. Okay. The advantages of a small kitchen. I can just pop things on the counter over there that you can't see. And by the end of class, you wouldn't want to see it. All right. So I need to add, no, I'm going to save this. All right. I'm going to cover this. No, I'm not. Sorry. I forgot one of the best tricks. So I did learn this from Fatima as well. I rarely use tomato at this time of year because the season's passed and like this is kind of hard and I don't know, it's not going to be beautiful inside. But she always would take just a little layer of the bottom skin off. Okay. And this is a trick that I use now in sauces and stews and soups. And a lot of times when tomatoes aren't great, so you're just taking off a little bit. So you've taken some skin off the bottom and you grate the tomato. Okay. And you'll see that the inside, and it's a large tomato. If you have a mushy tomato, it works better. I actually did look for a mushy tomato in the store today. And because if it's a mushier tomato, the skin kind of comes away. Because this isn't a mushy tomato, I don't want to get skin in there. So I'm going to actually peel it off with a knife. It's kind of stuck. And the interesting thing about this technique is that sometimes, it's you just don't want the pieces of a diced tomato or tomato paste or tomato puree or any of those. This is really lovely. All right. And if there's any other questions while I'm grating this tomato, it's a great time to ask. Or comments. If people have ever made a tagine, put it in the comments. Let us know how it went. Oh, and by the way, you can add meat to the tagine if you want. You can layer the meat in. Chicken, lamb is obviously very popular to do it with. Beef.
So what if you were gonna do meat, what cut of meat? And I assume it's going in raw, right?
It's going in raw. Although if you want, I mean, I have seen people who just sear the meat if it's beef or lamb, because that will help it stay moist. Okay, so they'll sear the outside, just brown it. And usually it's cut in cubes also. And you don't have to use an expensive cut. You could use like a chuck or, something not real expensive.
So it would be like if you were going to the butcher, you would ask for like lamb stew cubes or beef stew cubes for
Exactly.
this. Okay.
Yes, exactly. All right. So here I'm going to show you, you can see that we're starting to get down to it. Okay.
It does seem like grated tomato can be found in a lot of Jewish food from throughout Sephardi and Mizrahi traditions. Is that right, Susan?
Yes, it's a way of using the tomato that I think that they're onto something. I really do. I'll show you why. Two things to point out. One is the texture itself is so lovely. It almost just will melt into the tagine. And the other thing is, interestingly, there's only a few seeds visible in here. We've captured all the juice and all the tomato flesh. And I'm just putting it over the top. Okay. And now the heat is on the kind of like a medium. You have to be careful. You don't want to burn the bottom. If you happen to have a diffuser for your gas burner, this is a good time to use it. Okay, here we go. Now, what we're going to do is let that come to a boil. Not a boil, a simmer. Because you just want it to get hot enough that it's going to have some action and some steaming. And once it comes to that simmer, let's see how it's doing. Kind of starting to. We're going to turn it down a little bit. We're gonna cover it and we're gonna make some borrecas. It's gonna cook for about 20, 25 minutes. So before the end of class, you'll see me add the olives, the chickpeas, and the last of the preserved lemon. But then they'll cook more and you'll, I don't know if you all want to stay past 8:30 or 20 of 9 to see the finish, but you'll get pretty much the idea of it, right, when we're done. Okay, so this is gonna do its thing. All right. Now, what we're gonna do is get started on the borrecas. Can't wait to use that too. By the way, you can even use ras el hanout in like eggs, delicious. Or if you want to make some sort of like a frittata, or what we call in the Sephardic world, either pajado, sfongado, a bunch of different names, almendrote, which is basically like kind of like a kugel, except it's a lot of veggies, often a lot of herbs as well, and some egg to bind it all together. So it's less egg than a frittata usually, although Ladino being this crazy language that grew up in so many different places, that sometimes it is called a frittata by some Sephardim. I'd call it pajado. There's all these different names. But what I was going to say is you can use up vegetables that way. Use up herbs that are on kind of starting to go, and put them all together, chop them all up, saute them if they're pieces, like you could, if you were to do leek, for instance, eggplant, zucchini, any of these, saute them a little bit first, get them a little soft, mix them with the egg, put in some of the ras el hanout, and maybe you've already done some onion or garlic. Make this mixture, add a couple eggs, get your pan oiled, 350, 45 minutes maybe for a 9x13. Easy peasy, freezes well. You can cut those up little pieces like on toothpicks for appetizers. You can have them individually frozen to pop in to heat them up for a meal.
Hey, Susan, we have one question, which I have to say I'm also curious about the answer. So do you cover the tagine while it's cooking?
I will. Yes, you have to get that condensation action. I'm just waiting for it to come to a good simmer.
Okay, that's what we're waiting for. You have like 300 neurotic Jews who are waiting. Like, are you gonna cover the pot? What's happening? Me included. I was like, what's happening? Is she gonna cover
You
it?
talked about condensation. It can't condense without covering the
So
pot.
it's just waiting to bring it up to a simmer, and then you're gonna cover it. Okay.
Yeah, and it will cook.
We can all breathe now. Fantastic.
Yeah. So let's move on to talk about borrecas. Borrecas are such a wonderful story, and they're the kind of food that has a history that talks about the wanderings of people, the Jews, as well as the Turkic people, because they started there was borca, B-U-R-K-Q-A is the way that we would spell it. I think we're having liftoff here. Hang on. I can hear it a little. Yeah. Okay. And actually, some of the vegetables on bottom are already starting to kind of condense with cooking. So we're going to cover this puppy. I've got a timer I'm going to set for 25 minutes. So now it can go. Yep. Okay. Okay. So they were a handheld pie of the Turkic people, often fried. And they brought it with them when they kind of came into what became Ottoman lands and then later Turkey. At the time when this was getting very popular, which was 15th, 16th century, the Jews came. And the Jews came from Spain, where you can guess a handheld pie was an empanada, right? And the Jews used an oil-based dough which, because then you could put anything in it, and you could either make it parve or you could have dairy, but it was an oil-based dough. Okay. Third thing that happened was at the same time that the Jews were arriving, which is, from the 15th century, 16th century, especially when most of the Sephardim came to the Ottoman Empire, there was also growing up, and I want to get the name right, Yufka, Y-U-F-K-A. Yufka was a very paper-thin dough like phyllo, okay? And it wasn't until I did this research that I started to understand why some Sephardim use oil-based dough to make borrecas, and some Sephardim, like my family, use phyllo. And both are absolutely authentic. If you've ever seen, if you go on the Orba Shalom, which is the Atlanta Sephardic synagogue, they make borrecas year round. They have borreca Tuesday every month, and they make an oil-based dough borreca with the beautiful edges that they turn. They do this beautiful twisting. Like I said, my family does phyllo. And one of the things about phyllo that we really should talk about is there's many different kinds. I see people, because it's textured, using Pepperidge Farm, and I cringe. It's one of if you have trouble working with phyllo and you're using Pepperidge Farm, that's why. Because, not to rag on Pepperidge Farm, they have some good products. It's not a good phyllo. It cracks, it breaks. You'll see this one is also hechshered. This is an organic brand that is called the Phyllo Factory. To be honest, they carry it at Whole Foods, so it's not hard to get. Okay, this is a really nice phyllo, and we're going to open it up and use it today. The other thing that I do is I buy phyllo from Turkey, and my Persian market up in Rockville, Maryland has it. But you can see that this is baklava, and also borrecas all have like this pie feeling to them, layers. And many people make borrecas originally that way. They were layers of this thin dough and whatever filling you wanted to use. So this is interesting. This is not hechshered if you keep kosher. It is vegan, blah, 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 but not hechshered. Okay. So before we open our phyllo, we want to make the inside what we're going to stuff with. All right. So I love these. I mean, my two favorite borrecas are the spinach and cheese, feta cheese, which I just, with some friends, made 120 for my son's wedding rehearsal dinner. Yum. And pumpkin. Now, this is a savory pumpkin. You can make it sweet if you want to make like a dessert borreca, essentially. But I love these. And these are very often served as part of the Rosh Hashanah Sephardic Seder, because pumpkin or squash is one of the symbolic foods served at the Seder. And these are very traditional. All right. Let's get myself set up to do this. And here's the spices. So, all right. So first we're going to add the pumpkin puree. Okay. This is pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie filling. So be really careful. I went to buy some at this store, and I didn't realize that I actually did buy pumpkin filling, which I never do because it's pre-spiced, and I always want to control my spices myself. So I'm going to give that one away to the food bank, people who will need it and appreciate it much more than me. All right, so we're just getting all can of pumpkin in. All right, now, just trying to keep it a little bit neat. You really just add all the ingredients. So it's a beaten egg. You just throw them all in there. And the fillings are easy usually for borrecas. So this is the feta and it's crumbled. You know, you want it's like little pieces, but you don't want big chunks. Okay. I want to tell you also, a lot of people, I may give you some tips about keeping feta for longer. People often will say, oh, it spoils so fast. Well, many people, when they buy it, either it comes in liquid already or it comes in wrapped up in like saran type, you know, plastic. So feta likes to be kept in water, usually salted water. And if you change that water like every week or so, fresh to fresh water, especially I use filter because it makes it last even longer. My feta will last for several weeks in the fridge. So that I advise everyone do that. If it's in, you know, if you put it in a container, I just added feta, Parmesan, some cinnamon, and a little bit of cardamom. Cardamom is one of those things that kind of sneaks in underneath and gives you some flavor. You don't know what it is, but it kind of rounds out the flavor. Okay.
Susan, we have a bunch of questions, so when I can rapid fire give you questions, let me know.
All right, while I'm stirring now, let's do it.
Okay, number one, what brand of feta do you recommend?
Well, you know, quite honestly, I have a couple of options where I can buy feta from a couple of stores, you know, over the counter. I can get exactly what I want. If I can't, for whatever reason, I will buy the Greek feta from Trader Joe's. They also have an Israeli feta. It's much stronger tasting, so depending on the recipe, I'll buy the Israeli. If I want it a little milder, I'll buy the Greek. But you know, if you can do anything you can to avoid buying things like President or whatever that is, El Presidente, they're just not really good cheeses.
All right, another question that somebody asked is about using puff pastry instead of phyllo dough for this.
So yeah, a lot of people do use puff pastry. I never do. It's if you want to, that's fine. It's just, to me, that's not how I learned to make borrecas and how I love them. I find that with puff pastry, it often is too much dough for me, because you'll see in a moment when we start to wrap, we're using 1 or 2 pieces of the phyllo and just wrapping it. So it's not this big, huge bite. But I know a lot of people like puff pastry. And if you do, again, use it, because the important thing is to cook. So that's what you like, use it.
All right, hold on. I gotta go back up in the chat, and there were a couple of other questions. To the person who was asking about if we changed the view, I did not change the view. You may just have to change the view that you're looking at. It can either be in gallery or in speaker mode. Just to clarify, she is using pumpkin puree, not pumpkin pie filling. Pumpkin pie filling will have spices and, yep, there you go. Trader Joe's pumpkin.
Organic pumpkin filling, not pie filling.
Not
I'm
pie.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and then the last question is, can you name the Persian market in Rockville that you like to go to?
Oh, I love it. Yekta. Actually, I had a friend go there for me the other day because she was heading up, and I was afraid if I went, I would buy way more than what I needed, which is what I always do there. Yes, Yekta, Yekta. It's a wonderful place.
Right. I'm just going to respond to Francis's question. Francis, we are going to share the recipe for the Moroccan tagine. When the follow-up email goes out, the recipe will there, and will also be up on the Nosher's site. Okay.
I want you all, if you can see, and here, can you see the condensation on the lid? Like there's a lot of this, liquid water, steam that's coming up and condensing, it doesn't drop down because the same way, because it doesn't have the sloping side. That's another reason we used 2 cups of liquid instead of 1. And every so often, because I don't want to open this, by the way, I'll just shake the bottom to make sure, help make sure it's not sticking. Okay. Any other questions? Nope. Okay.
I think we're good for now. Thank you so much, Susan.
Anytime, just jump in, because I know that it can be frustrating when you have a question and it doesn't get answered and I move on. It can be a little frustrating. All right. Now comes the fun part. Playing with phyllo. It's fun with phyllo. As I said, I'm going to use this one. What I've done is I have a towel here, and some people use paper towel, but I've cut my use of paper towel so drastically, I don't. This is a towel that I've just dampened. It's slightly damp. I'll just go in, wet my hand, and kind of go like this to the towel, okay? A couple times. And so it's slightly damp, because you don't want it to be really moist, because that'll ruin the phyllo too, as much as drying out. So we just open the packet. All right. And slide it out. Okay. What you're going to do, whatever kind you're using, has this little kind of film on the bottom, plasticky kind of film. So this one is taped down. I'm just going to slip. There we go. You're going to keep that on the bottom to protect the phyllo that's on the bottom. Okay. And we're going to work up. So we're just going to unroll the phyllo. And then I'm going to show you my trick for cutting it. And it's almost always folded, by the way. So just know that. Okay. This is a little tight on space. It's not where I usually work, but I wanted you all to be able to see. By the way, I'm going to move this to the back burner so you can see even better. Okay, there we go. I think you can see better now. Yes? Is that better, Shannon?
Yes. Sorry, I muted myself. Yes. Sorry, someone
yourself. Okay.
Someone wanted to know if the phyllo dough is at room temperature.
It's at, yes. Well, actually, it just needs to be defrosted. Keep it in the freezer. When you want to use it, put it in the fridge overnight. And then it'll stay in the fridge for like a week if you want it to, which this did, because I ran out of room in my freezer, so I had to take it out sooner than yesterday. And it doesn't really matter if it's at room temperature, as long as it's fully defrosted. Okay. I use a pizza cutter instead of a knife because it is great for controlling how you're cutting. If I were making big borrecas, I would cut this into thirds. Okay, let me just give you an idea of the width. Okay, so this is 12.5 inches wide. So you would cut this into thirds. That would be a little over 3 inches each. I want to make borrequitas. Borrequitas are little borrecas. Okay, so we're going to cut it into 4. So usually what I do is cut it down the middle. And this is just a great tool. And I'm working fairly quickly because it will dry out. Let me just get this. Okay, there we go. All right, the other thing you should know, you can use butter or olive oil. I like olive oil for these. I used to always use butter, and now I've gotten into the olive oil. But if you use butter, you have to decide if you want to use salted or unsalted. I tend to use unsalted if I'm using butter. I did put a little salt in here, and it has feta. All right, we're covering part of this to keep it.
Susan, why do you cover it?
because if we don't cover it, it dries out too quickly. This feta dries out like really fast. So it's covered by a little bit of a damp towel, just to help keep it. And then what I'm gonna do is cut this. Like I said, I usually work in a bigger space, but you couldn't see it as well if I moved over to the counter. So this will work. We'll make it work. All right. So you can see, you just want to check that you've cut through. But it's so quick and easy with this pizza cutter. Great little trick. All right, here we go. I am going to work on, now if you're really fast, you can work on 2 strips at once, and I'm going to try to do that. I want to show you, I very lightly brush oil on the inside, but it is very light. And you never want to scrub your phyllo with oil or whatever you're using. And then, because they're a borrecas, which is a little borreca, you only want a small amount, like a teaspoon, and you put it on. I always, and I don't know if this has to do with being left-handed, I always add it to the right corner. You add it to the left corner, but then you go in and you take 1 or 2. In this case, this phyllo is really good, and I'm just going to take one piece, and you fold it like a flag. If any of you have ever folded an American flag, exactly what you're doing here. Don't worry if things tear. Oh, the whole thing just tore. Okay, we're just going to keep going, because what ends up happening, tore in a bad place. Actually, let me do this better. So see, phyllo is very, very forgiving. And I'm having fun playing with it now, just to make sure everything's covered. And what you do is you brush the inside of that last bit. And you brush the whole outside a little bit. This is not a lot of oil. And when you fold it over, the oil or butter creates basically glue. This is not a beauty. We'll do another. It'll still taste the same. And when, by the way, when you cook them, I'm worried. Oh, these are all split down the middle, some of them. This is unusual. I just raved about this phyllo. All right. But when you cook them, they don't rise or spread. What I've done, because I know it's cut, is just gone ahead and already moved that half from the top down a little bit. The oil held it in place. And now you can see I have just constantly, you're folding like a flag. You come to the end and just do a little bit. One's much, much nicer. Okay. And you wrap it around. And you want to put it in the pan on that last bit, on having that down, that side down, because it'll help it hold it. All right. And then you play with your spatial abilities to see how many you can fit on a pan without touching them. All right, so we're just going to do another quickie. Let's see how much time we have left on the, okay. I moved so much.
You're okay. Take what you need to finish. Let me, there were a couple questions that we had come in. Could you repeat the brand of phyllo dough that you like to use?
So I use this brand, which is called the Phyllo Factory. It's an organic, and I get it at Whole Foods. It's the only place I've seen it here in DC, and I love it. Or else I go to Yekta and I get the Turkish, which I have to tell you, really works well. And they have different weights. So phyllo comes in different weights now. So you can get like slightly heavier, you can get the really thin, depending on what you're making. So if you're a real master, then you know what you want to use. I want to show you the difference. Okay. Now, so I'm just brushing very lightly. This is something that you gotta like to cook with your hands. You know, you gotta like the feel. Look how, and then it just tucks under. Okay, and there you go. I'll make one more, and then I want to show you how I finished them. Oh, all right. So I'm loving the smell of the tagine. It is just terrific. All right. So this is, again, 1 or 2. This is pretty thin phyllo. I often use 2 pieces, 2 sheets. So oh, it just tore. You know what? You just keep going. I'll show, if you can see, there's an edge here that the second sheet tore. You know what? It's fine because there's enough with the 2 sheets that I'm still going to get a beautiful borreca and no one will know. So that's one of the wonderful things about borrecas. Really and truly, this phyllo is very forgiving. If you have good phyllo, it actually is very, very forgiving. And a lot of people are afraid to cook with phyllo. Don't be. Seriously.
Because you're wrapping it in multiple layers, will it not matter because it's covered up, right?
Yes. Yes.
Someone also asked about whole wheat phyllo. There's a couple of questions about the tagine I saw come in, but let's let Susan finish the borrekas first, and then we'll move on to any last questions about the tagine. So someone wanted to know about whole wheat phyllo dough.
Wow. Do they know where it is? I've never seen it. Never, ever, ever seen it. Probably because it would have to be a very fine grind of whole wheat. Very fine, because phyllo is so thin. But I've never seen it. If anyone knows where to get it or they've seen it, I would love to. Even in Turkey, I've never seen it. Okay, next.
You want all the questions now? Okay, you got it.
Oh yeah, this is a good time because I'm just rolling a few of these.
Okay, so I think okay, I'm gonna ask you one last question about the phyllo. Someone says, do you use phyllo for Passover because you're Sephardic?
No, we still don't eat the wheat that is not made as matzah. No. But you use matzah instead. There, you can soften matzah and make borrecas. I don't personally like them, so I don't do it. But you can.
But Susan has a lot of great recipes, that are Passover friendly. So we will have to have Susan back to do a Passover class, no doubt. Okay, sorry, excuse me. Questions for tagine. Okay, someone wanted to know, can you please clarify, are we supposed to use the liquid from the canned chickpeas?
Yes, that went in first. After the spices and garlic were added to the onion, cooked for a few minutes. Then you put that liquid in, stir it around, add the pumpkin or squash, okay? And then you mix all that together as your bottom layer and go from there. So that's how you use it in this. You can just dump it into soups and stews, as I said. Wonderful.
If you were going to use chicken for tagine, where in the layering should it go? Should the chicken be cooked or raw or cut into strips or chunks?
Good questions. I've seen it done many different ways. I would, suggest that, of course, you need to experiment a little bit because I wouldn't do strips. I would do chunks because they would tend to stay a little juicier. So I would do chunks And I would layer them near the bottom. Near the bottom, not on the bottom. I would probably do your pumpkin or squash and then your chicken.
What type of optional olives does Susan recommend for the tagine? Brine, salt cured? Could you say more about that?
These are really simple. You can use any kind of olive you like. I've had it with kind of the Moroccan strong salt cured olive. What I'm using today is just a canned green olive. Either the Israeli brand works, or you can buy them also at places at grocery stores. Let's check our tagine. But that you can use any olive you want. I don't like it, even though I absolutely love Kalamata olives. I don't like them so much in this, but some people do. So it's really up to you. I also want to show you, let me cover my phyllo. Juggling. Okay. We're just going to cover this because after class, I'll just be in my kitchen making some more borrecas. But I want to show you how I finish them. And that is, I like to sprinkle a little bit of the grated Parmesan. I don't know if any of you are aware, in Israel, in around, I think it was around 2014, the rabbis got involved in borrecas. They were worried. I'm going to cook these just in case. That's fine. They didn't like the fact that you couldn't tell the difference between what was meat, what was cheese, what was veggie. So they actually now dictate the shape, like potato borrecas are square. The spinach feta borrecas are triangle. I mean, they actually, you're supposed to do, I don't know if everyone does it, but you are supposed to do it according to what the rabbis say, so that nobody has to take a chance that they bought and then might serve a dairy borrecas at a meat meal, you know? I love it that there's a ruling on borrecas.
I actually just shared an article we have about that from one of our Tel Aviv-based writers called "The Secret to the." Oh, I didn't. I sent a wrong one. I'm gonna send the right one. But we have an article about this, and I think it's really fascinating. And you'll notice now the next time you go to Israel, or you see pictures of the shuk in Israel, and you'll notice all the different shapes, and that there's a reason for it, which I think is just so fascinating.
So wonderful. I want to read that article. Ah, our tagine really cooking. And by the way.
And how long does it cook in total, Susan?
What?
How long does the tagine cook in total?
So it's about 25 minutes. Then what we're going to do now is add olives and chickpeas and let it cook for another about 15 minutes, just so that these get heated up. And I want to stick a fork in the cabbage. I'm also adding, by the way, the last of the preserved lemon. Let me just, so cabbage, yeah, the cabbage in 15 minutes will be completely cooked. And you know, oh, actually, the zucchini is close to being done. This is perfect. What you want is you want your vegetables to be kind of al dente so that they're tender enough to eat, but they're not fully cooked to the side. Tagines are not like, you know, in the modern way of cooking where we just barely cook a vegetable. Tagines cook vegetables. And I was just going to mention also, I happen to really like, this is a good pot. It has a good lid for this. So, and the vegetables give off juice too. If you want to use a little bit less, you can use a little less. I love the liquid from this. Make some rice or make a traditional couscous. And, you know, you have this beautiful meal for Shabbat, and maybe you'll have a salad with it and a bunch of challah to sop up too. Let's just see. Mm. What I like about this is that the seasoning is subtle. It's not in your face. I totally taste it, but it's not like, whoa, because of the way it's done. It's poured through the layers. It comes up from the bottom. Wow. If I do say so myself, it's good. Okay.
A few more questions. Susan, at what temperature do you bake the borrecas and for how long? And can you
It
tagine?
depends on your oven, 20 to 25 minutes. And actually, I just made them for a wedding shower. And we used her oven and they cooked in 18 minutes. So just keep an eye. I know my oven, so I've set it for 21 minutes. And
And
I'll
can
check
you
it.
use a Dutch oven for the tagine? Is that an option?
Yes, absolutely. Dutch ovens are great for the tagine.
Amazing. All right. If there's any, come here, buddy. Come here. If there's any last questions, now's the time. So the tagine, even if you put meat in it, would it cook in that same 20, 40
Well,
minutes in
it's
total?
25 plus 15, so it's like 40 minutes.
Okay.
And so if you have your meat at the bottom and all the juice closest to the heat, you're only putting a layer of the pumpkin or squash and then the meat. That's going to cook.
Great. Someone says, what's the best way to serve the tagine? Sounds like with rice or couscous, right?
Get some rice or couscous. And I always also, and some people add it in the cooking, but Fatima never did. And I decided not to add it, but when I serve it, this is chopped coriander or cilantro. So I will sprinkle it liberally. Now, here's what you can do. A tagine is brought to the table sometimes as is in the actual bottom of the pot. This you could, or if you have a nice cast iron. The other option, I need to stop doing that. The other option is that you can carefully lift out some of this, and you can do it in layers. You can kind of take off the olives and the chickpeas and keep them on the side. Take off the cabbage wedges. This is exactly what Fatima would do when she would want to put it on a serving platter. You just separate out everything and then you build your serving platter however you want. But and the other thing is you can treat it like a stew and just take it out, put it on a dish, put on some cilantro and eat it.
I
That's
love
fine.
the idea of separating it out and then building it back up. That's beautiful.
It's really nice, and it makes it very special, and it makes people who are going to eat it feel special, because really you see it wasn't that hard to make, so you can spend a little bit of extra time on that.
The last question we got sort of repeatedly is about the meat. If you're adding a meat layer, you said that you could sear the meat and then add it in, but could it also just be raw?
I
I think it probably depends on the cut of meat, right?
think it depends on the meat, but also if it's lamb and beef, chicken you can just put in, it's fine. It's like poaching the chicken. Red meat tends to dry out in a different way and lose its juices if it's not seared. I think it's like brisket. The best way to make a brisket, right? You want to braise it. You want to sear it before you put it in the crock pot or the oven or however you're cooking it. It's with a roast, the same thing. It's really best to sear that kind of meat and seal in the juices. I don't know. Do you have any opinion, Shannon, in your experience?
I would say this, this is definitely outside of my normal cooking, but I would guess if you were going to use like chunks of lamb or beef, that I might want to braise it a little bit first before adding into it, because I would usually cook those cuts for like 2 hours on low to be tender. So
Right.
if it was me and I really wanted to make a tagine with meat, I would probably Google around some other recipes and see what that strategy calls for before jumping in. That would be what I would do. But
Yeah, I
um,
would totally, yeah, I think I'm with you. I would braise it and make sure all the sides, and also make sure that the pieces aren't too big or they won't cook. A
Yeah.
lot of times when we cook, we have more like 2-inch pieces, chunks.
Yeah.
You want them to be like 1-inch pieces if you can.
That's a good point. I would probably just make your recipe as is. That
I
was
have to
me.
say, I have watched other people make chicken and meat tagines, but I don't make them because I don't eat red meat. So I know how to cook it, but I really, really, this is a wonderful vegetable recipe. It's like a whole meal in one, gluten free. It's uh, low fat, very low fat. You saw this whole recipe has 2 tablespoons of olive oil. That's it, and it has protein from your chickpeas, so it's
I
vegan.
mean, it's really like such a great, people are always asking, what's a great dish to serve at a holiday that's, vegetarian or vegan, gluten free, right? Like all of this is so perfect, all on its own and flavorful. Like I absolutely love this. And I feel personally like, oh, now that I watched you make it, Susan, now I could make this.
Oh, you totally could. Everyone really, the thing is to go in the kitchen and try, because people say, well, you've never had failures in the kitchen like I've had. I mean, I've had people say that to me. I'm like, really? Do you want to know about some of them? I mean, right, Shannon? I mean, there's so many times I can tell you stories. Of course, anyone who cooks is going to run up against challenges and not always meet the challenge. Or, I've had really awful packages of phyllo dough. Not this brand, just to be honest, and not the Turkish, but back when I used to use some others. Oh, and it would be just a mess, and I wouldn't even be able to get to fold.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now I know what we're going to start our next class with, um, which is going to be our absolute worst, um, our worst cooking catastrophes that ever happened. I want to thank everybody who joined us on this lovely Wednesday evening. We had a lot of people here, over 300 people here joining for Susan's class. I can say I learned so much. I just want to thank you, Susan, so much for always joining our community and sharing so much expertise, wisdom, wonderful stories. We have another event coming up next week with Adina Sussman and
Mhm.
Joel Haber. It's not a cooking class, but I think is going to be so fascinating because it's going to be a conversation about how Jewish Shabbat stews have influenced and changed the culinary landscape around the world. So if you've ever heard that like cassoulet was inspired by cholent, that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. And both Adina and Joel are writing intensely right now about Shabbat dishes and about Shabbat stews. So I'm very excited about the conversation. It's at 12 o'clock on November 8th. So I hope you'll tune in and join us. Um,
I've already signed up.
Awesome. The just to reiterate one last time, the video and the recipes will be shared in a follow-up email, so stay tuned. And thank you guys all for joining us. Once again, Susan, thank you so, so, so much.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you. Look at you like Wonder Woman.
Sorry,
Thank
sick
you,
kid.
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
You will.